Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Liz Pena. I'm a marketing specialist with Verity IT, and today we're going to uncover some of what lies beneath the dark web and how it can directly affect you and your business. We're joined today by Kim Kanice, a channel success manager with Kaseya, a leading provider of IT management software. Kim partners with companies like us to help organizations better understand cyber threats, reduce vulnerabilities, and address compliance challenges. With over a decade of sales, marketing, and consulting experience around technology solutions, Kim is passionate about helping organizations leverage technology to improve efficiency and drive growth. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kim.
You bet. Thank you, Liz. Really excited to be here. Thanks for the intro and the warm welcome. So today we're going to be looking outward. We're going to be talking about external threats, specifically those threats posed to your organization by the dark web. So specifically, we're going to talk, of course, about what the dark web is, certainly going to touch on how compromised credentials can lead to a breach, want to take a look at the current landscape of threats, and then, of course, offer some tips on how to keep your business safe. So I'm sure by now we've all seen the stories about data breaches, right? It feels like every day there's a new story about a company that got breached and how it affected all kinds of users, includes all kinds of stolen personal data, personal information that's now for sale on the dark web. I worry that these headlines have become so prevalent and so normal that we've become almost immune and maybe desensitized. I'm afraid that we don't really think about what this exposed information can mean and the damage that it can cause. But I think we're at a point where we really have to confront what it means when our company's data or our employees' data or our customers' data are exposed on the dark web. So we are going to talk a bit about how cyber criminals operate within the dark web, certainly how they're buying and selling stolen data and what they can do with that data. And as I said, certainly offer some tips on how you can protect your organization. But where I'd really like to start is talking about how these breaches are happening, how exactly cyber criminals are stealing data to turn around and sell it on the dark web. So here we're looking at a breakdown of the different ways that breaches occur. What I'd like to point out here is that the majority of breaches happen because of compromised credentials, that is, stolen employee email addresses and passwords. So let's take phishing emails as an example here at the top. We've all seen those phishing scams, those fake emails that appear to be sent from legitimate companies and that ask victims to provide some sort of sensitive information, usually through a link that looks like it'll go to a company's website. But that website, of course, is a really clever fake, and the information provided, those compromised credentials, go straight to the criminals behind the scam, who then use those details to commit fraud or sell them on the dark web. Super low tech, but highly effective, and the scammer ends up with those stolen credentials. Or how about business email compromise down here, which is a type of a phishing scam where the attacker impersonates or compromises an executive's email account to then manipulate the victim into a fraudulent wire transfer, or maybe giving away some sensitive information. Other breaches we see here, the result of exposures in maybe the supply chain network, maybe malicious employee, or just compromised credentials through an unknown method. The point here is that exposed credentials can lead to a massive breach, stolen data, ransomware attack. So whether through phishing or a rogue employee setting out to do harm or an unintentional mistake by someone in your supply chain network, a lot of it starts at that human level, and all of it can have some pretty major implications. So to dig into this just a bit, I'd like to talk about how employee credentials can lead to a breach. So here's a great visual that I think helps us understand just how real and broad that risk can be. We're looking at 9 key functional areas of a business. So, from HR and payroll to email to your CRM, all the way through to banking and even social media networks. I'd like for you to kind of look through here and think of all those places where your employees are going to perform their day-to-day job functions. All those places where they're creating accounts, places where they're using, of course, their work email address, and then they're creating a password. You may be using some of the companies listed here. Maybe you're using some other third-party vendors for some of these areas. But regardless, I think you can probably imagine how poor password hygiene can really leave your business vulnerable. So I think we have to think about that human element and ask ourselves if we're confident that our team members are creating unique and hard to crack passwords for every single site that they're using, that they're not reusing passwords across multiple sites, because that's where that data on the dark web can really come back and hurt your company. When these accounts are connected by emails and passwords, when users are using the same or maybe the variation of the same login credentials across multiple sites. Cyber criminals are banking on the fact that a lot of us are using the same password on multiple sites. So when an email and password are exposed, they're going to test that combination across hundreds, if not thousands of popular sites to try to gain access. So let's say, for example, I use Staples online to purchase office supplies, and Staples experiences the and maybe I'm using that same password on, say, Bank of America, where I do my online banking, or what if I'm using that same password on Dropbox, where there's lots of sensitive company data, or worst of all, if I'm using that password on the network, right? It's not good. So I think the other thing to mention and point out here is that when we're offboarding an employee who's leaving the company for whatever reason, we can often be really good at turning off permissions on internal sites, but we often don't think about all of those external sites that team members had access to. So that even when that person no longer works at an organization, they may still have active accounts on these third-party sites. So through all of this, I think you can see how the potential for damage dramatically increases from just a single compromised username and password, and how exposures can really have almost like a domino effect that can lead to things like, lost revenue or downtime, maybe damaged reputation. That ongoing monitoring of the dark web can help. It provides that external threat intelligence so that you're aware of any exposures from these third parties that might affect your employees. Often, a company that experiences a breach doesn't publicly disclose it until weeks, sometimes even months later. And in that time, those cyber criminals have really been putting those exposed credentials to work. So you might be wondering, what can cyber criminals do with that stolen data? Why are they so valuable? Well, they can be used to send spam from compromised email accounts, to install malware on compromised systems. Cyber criminals can even use those same credentials to compromise other accounts, or they can be used to steal sensitive data and to even steal identities. Unfortunately, there are just lots of things that cyber criminals can do with that stolen data. So we're seeing year-over-year increases in data breaches that involve stolen employee credentials. So I think it can be helpful to think about cybersecurity through the lens of what's referred to as the zero trust framework. This concept of zero trust is the acknowledgement and belief that everybody has been compromised. Because if we operate under that assumption that we've all been compromised, we can then shift our focus to access management. That is, making sure that the right people have the right secure access to the right machines with the right privileges. And at the same time, we're monitoring for those compromised credentials and external threats like those on the dark web. So this framework really lets us manage individual access to make sure that we don't have team members who are accessing the network when and where they shouldn't, or maybe logging into machines that they shouldn't have access to, or having privileges to sensitive data or sensitive applications that are well beyond what they need for their particular role. So the cybersecurity framework really lets us identify and address those gaps. But beyond that, it also allows us to work towards alignment with compliance laws, which really tell us how we should approach security and access management. Because as we think about cybersecurity, I think we have to mention that compliance piece. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I feel it's important to note that compliance is mandatory and that even small to medium-sized businesses have to follow state laws and regulations related to data protection. Compliance and privacy laws really make it so that cybersecurity is no longer a nice to have, but rather it's something that's required. I wanted to circle back and spend just a few minutes talking about phishing attacks, since they are becoming increasingly effective and sophisticated. We continue to see year over year increases in phishing scams, but it's picked up even more during the COVID pandemic. The FBI issued a warning all the way back to last April about an expected increase in business-related phishing scams. Since then, unfortunately, their warning has certainly become a reality. Cybercriminals rely on deception. So the pandemic has really become almost like a dream come true for them, right? They've been able to capitalize on all of this uncertainty and unrest and rapid changes and just overall disruption that really makes us more susceptible to phishing scams. A lot of us are accessing information in different ways and maybe at different times than normal. So I think those bad guys know that we're less likely to really take the time and examine a message and make good decisions on whether to open it and whether to click. So, not surprisingly, we've seen a surge in COVID-related phishing scams. We've pulled some real-life examples here to share, like this one that looks to come from the CDC. We've pointed out some of those telltale signs that can help us identify this as a scam, that fake email address, the overly generic greeting, the poor grammar. But these messages are timely and they're relevant, and for the distracted, emotional, maybe information-hungry user, they're really quite effective as well. As another example, this one's tailored to a specific company, in this case, Miller Supply. And since it appears to be sent from an internal team member, I think it could definitely be quite compelling. But notice one thing I wanted to point out, if we look really closely at the sender email up here, you'll notice that it uses a double N instead of an M. Super subtle, but if we're looking closely, that's really all we need to tip off that it's a scam. But why limit phishing scams to just email, right? Cyber criminals have realized that they can also carry out these attacks through text messages too. We've always got our phones on us. We're constantly looking at incoming messages. It's so easy to be caught off guard, see that new text message, and click on it without really stopping to think about it. So the bottom line is, phishing scams are getting increasingly sophisticated and targeted and tough to detect. But there are some steps that we can take to identify the scams. We've all been focused on good hygiene and washing our hands to decrease our risk to the coronavirus. I propose, we apply that same hygiene to our email. That we train employees to take just 20 seconds to examine an email and really look for those telltale signs. Things like in this list here, first, see if that message includes super generic content or maybe just that broad impersonal greeting. Second, always look closely at that email address, especially the domain. Like we saw in that example, it can be off by just a single letter or number, but that's all it takes to let us know that it's a scam. Third, consider if that message is trying to create a false sense of urgency, or maybe it's got those really strong demands for actions. Always look closely before clicking. Just that simple mouse over can tell you if the destination is legit or if it might be steering us into a trap. Uh, Fifth, phishing scams are known to be filled with misspelled words, incorrect grammar, just all over weird messaging. We should be on the lookout for all of those things. And then six, make sure a site is secure before entering any sensitive data. And then finally, think before clicking on any attachments. It could look super urgent, super important, but it could also have malware that can cause a whole lot of damage. I think a lot of times we can be in a real rush and distracted when checking email, but if we take just these 20 seconds to stop and look for these key things, it can save a whole lot of trouble and potential disaster down the road. I also think it's these kinds of examples and resources that you can use to help educate your team members on what to look for. I can't overemphasize that education really can help change your employees' behavior, help them establish really good habits, and then also create that overall culture of security within your organization. We really need to empower employees to become a strong link in security by training them how to be vigilant and cautious and to know what to look for. So there's a reason why we're spending so much time talking about phishing scams. They really are one of the easiest yet most effective ways that employee data is stolen. So I wanted to show you just how easy it can be to launch successful phishing scams. Phishing kits like what we're looking at here are available to buy on the dark web, and cyber criminals, even those with minimal technical skills, can easily launch phishing campaigns using these pre-made phishing templates and some step-by-step instructions. As part of those phishing kits, legitimate websites are cloned, and then what appears to be the login page is actually a credential stealing site. This is a side-by-side example of the actual Facebook landing page and the landing page included in this phishing kit. Uh, It's nearly impossible to tell the difference, and I think you can see how effective it could be. I know I would be hard pressed to tell the difference. And then just another example to really drive this home. This one, of course, for eBay, and again, just as difficult to tell the real one from the fake one. I think these examples really show why these kits can be so effective, and they make it so simple to launch as well. We've talked quite a bit about how data breaches happen and how phishing scams play a big part of that. So I wanted to next talk about the dark web, where a lot of that stolen data ends up. Simply put, the dark web is that part of the internet that's intentionally hidden and that's inaccessible through standard browsers and methods. While there are some legitimate uses of the dark web, it's unfortunately become just a haven for criminal elements and activities, including the emergence of this thriving marketplace for the buying and selling of stolen credentials. I realize a lot of us don't have a clear picture of what exactly the dark web looks like, how it operates, how cyber criminals are able to conduct their business. So we thought it would be helpful to share some actual snapshots that our analysts grabbed so that we can kind of get a good look at the dark web. So this first snapshot shows a credit card data dump. It's advertising fresh and high quality credit cards with CVV for all countries around the world. Buyers can create a curated list based on geography. I'm not sure if it's big enough for you to read, but this seller is planning his retirement, so he's selling off his stock of 2 million credit cards. Or how about this offering of business bank account and routing numbers that are perfect for ACH fraud? It's even instructing buyers to search for the individual social security number online so that they can get their bank logins and hack into their online bank accounts. And check out this one. This is an advertisement for the largest known data dump for just $10. What I think is interesting here is notice how the cyber criminal operations are run quite similar to legitimate businesses, complete with ratings about responsiveness and product quality. Looks like the quality of information here was given 5 stars, seller communication is 4 stars. If you're a 5-star hacker, you definitely have credibility in the space and can build a base of loyal recurring customers. And then here's a dark web listing offering up data on California business owners. Notice the reference to fools in the listing title. That's not a spelling error. That's actually a term used by fraudsters that means it's got enough personal information to commit identity fraud, usually the name, social security number, date of birth, account numbers, and more. This offer calls out the high credit scores. If we think like a cyber criminal, I think you'll understand that the higher credit scores equal higher spending limits, right? So Foles listings, especially this one touting those high credit scores, are extremely valuable. As you can see, this one was so popular that it sold out. And then finally, if anyone's looking for a career change or on the hunt for a job, the Dark Overlord is hiring, and the pay is quite good. This is an actual job posting from the dark web, and you can see that for just 10 years of experience and some innovative thinking, cybercriminal can make $762,000 to start, and then increase to over $1 million in just 2 years. That's some pretty good money, and I think it underscores just how lucrative a career in cybercrime can be. What I also find interesting here is that there's a probationary period, performance reviews, just like a legitimate company might put in place. So turning now from snapshots of the dark web, I wanted to touch on just a couple of emerging methods that we're seeing cyber criminals use to execute attacks. One is this trend where a ransomware attack escalates to extortion. Generally speaking, the guidance has been that if you get hit with a ransomware attack, you don't pay the ransom because there's just no guarantee that paying off cyber criminals will get that data back. But now cyber criminals aren't just encrypting data, they're also stealing it, and they're telling victims if they don't pay the ransom, they'll release the stolen data on the dark web. So that even if an organization can afford to rebuild and restore the data on its own, they now have that added pressure of paying just to keep their sensitive files off of the dark web. Speaking of ransomware, we've also seen the emergence of ransomware as a service. For subscriptions of just $100 a month, cyber criminals can get a really nice branded platform to log into, like we see here. They add in all of the contacts and companies that they want to launch a ransomware attack against. All those people they'll send the ransomware to, and there are pre-made templates ready to go. They can just basically sit back and monitor the attack through this dashboard, track who's opened, who's clicked the link, who's paid the ransom. I think this whole ransomware as a service is a really easy way to operationalize those attacks for deployment across a really large scale. And it allows even the novice cyber criminal to launch attacks without too much difficulty. So to wrap up our discussion here, we've talked about ways that cyber criminals can steal data, how that data is bought and sold on the dark web, what those bad actors can do with that data. We've also talked about how some major events like the COVID pandemic really create new opportunities for cyber criminals to exploit. But we don't want this to feel hopeless. Yes, there are some external threats that really can cause some serious damage to your organization. But I think if we're aware of those threats and if we take some steps to increase security, we can minimize those risks and help protect your organization and your employees and your customers. We've listed out some tips here to start moving in that direction. We've spent some time on the first few here, checking links before clicking, looking closely at those suspicious or unexpected attachments. But wanted to circle back on that compliance piece for just a second. As we said, compliance is no longer optional, and businesses are required to take steps to protect data and privacy. Automation can help take away some of that frustration and medium by managing compliance regulations and documentation. We also talked quite a bit about the ramifications of exposed passwords. So it's incredibly important that we help employees protect those passwords both on the network and off the network, perhaps through something like a password manager. You can also add an extra layer of security through two-factor authentication. Part of that zero trust framework that we talked about is ensuring that the right users have the right access, and 2FA can help with that. There are some really great solutions that provide that balance between convenience and security. And also, keep an eye on those bad guys by monitoring the dark web. We talked quite a bit about how exposed credentials can lead to catastrophe. I know Verity can run a dark web scan to show what's already out there on the dark web so that you can minimize any vulnerabilities. And then it's important to implement that ongoing credential monitoring so you can get those early alerts as soon as anything new is found on the dark web. And then finally, and I would say almost most importantly, bring in a team that you trust to help put together the security strategies that'll work best for your company, and really lean on them to provide that guidance and advice that'll help you stay on top of the changing threat landscape. Cybersecurity is not a one-size-fits-all solution across all organizations. It's ever evolving, just like your business. So I encourage you to enlist some help in figuring out where you are today with security, and then let a team like Verity put a plan in place to get you where you need to be. So with that final thought, I'll turn it back over to you, Liz, to address any questions that might have come through.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We did have some time for a few questions, and a couple have come in. If you can chime in, Kim.
Sure.
The first question we had was, how do I get my credentials off the dark web once they've been exposed?
Yeah, this is a really good question and an important question. You run the scan, you find that there is some data out on the dark web. So the natural inclination, the natural question is, how do I get it off of there? And unfortunately, once your credentials are on the dark web, there is no way to remove them. There's no way to get it back. And I think that's one of the reasons why exposures are so troublesome, because once it's out there, you just can't get it back. But it's also why it's important to team up with a knowledgeable team, because they can provide that guidance to mitigate the risks posed by those exposed credentials. And I think it's also why that ongoing dark web monitoring is so important, because we often see that the scammers will piggyback on exposures with additional and even more targeted scams that can lead to even more problems. So that ongoing credential monitoring can really provide those critical early alerts when additional exposures hit the dark web so that you can hopefully take some swift action.
Awesome. And then speaking of ongoing, this question is, how often should you check for stolen emails and passwords on the dark web?
Oh, that's another good question. So I think we've talked about the prevalence of data breaches and that thriving market for stolen credentials. And so I think it's important to know when you and your employees' credentials have been exposed on the dark web. Scans are important. Dark web scans can help You understand what's already out on the dark web so you can take steps to protect yourself and your company. But it's just a moment of time, right? It's a snapshot in time. So following that scan, it's important to put in place ongoing 24/7 dark web monitoring so that you can be notified as soon as something new is found on the dark web. So the best practice is to have that ongoing continuous monitoring so that, again, you get those critical early alerts that can help prevent that potential costly and widespread data breach. And I think because it's continuous, because it's round the clock, that external monitoring can really provide some peace of mind knowing that you've got that external threat intelligence in place.
Perfect. Thank you so much for answering those, Kim. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. We do want to take a brief second to offer everyone who joined us a free dark web scan. We'll be reaching out after this webinar to schedule that with each and every one of you. That way, if you do have compromised credentials, or if you do not have compromised credentials, that's great. But if you do, we can start taking the right steps to help. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next webinar, Stop Targeted Attacks Before They Reach Your Users, on May 26th. We hope everyone has a productive day.